if you're someone like Putin, you look and you think, they're not taking it seriously. They're not, they're not likely to fight. They're not likely to do anything.
So you have served as head of the Navy. You have been a security minister. So looking at this through your military and political eye, from all you've seen at the NATO summit in Madrid, what difference would it make on the ground?
Oh, I think it'll make a considerable difference. I have no doubt that Putin, like all dictators and autocrats like that, look very carefully at what other nations are doing. And for some years, I'm afraid that particularly the European nations and the UK have been cutting defence. And if you're someone like Putin, you look and you think, they're not taking it seriously. They're not, they're not likely to fight. They're not likely to do anything. Now, with the statements from the NATO conference, it is quite clear that NATO has been reinvigorated. It is actually looking at the possibility that there is a threat of a world war, and the way to stop the world war is show the person who's likely to start it that it's not worth a candle. And raising the number of troops, for example, in Eastern Europe, at readiness is a very useful thing. I was always very worried about the small number of troops we had in the Baltic states, and I referred to them as a tethered goat, which was picked up by a number of people. And the Estonians and Latvians, Lithuanians don't want a tethered goat because the fighting will be in their country. They want a robust force that makes people think twice about doing anything.
Yeah, I had quite a, in some ways, disturbing conversation with Kira Rudik, a Ukrainian MP, on the program just a very short while ago here on Drive, and she was using diplomatic language, but she was making the point that the volume of munitions and ammunition getting to Ukraine on the battlefield was just a small fraction of the sort of promises that were being made so far. It sounded pretty desperate.
I have to say I fear that is true. There have been a lot of big promises made by people. I think UK has done reasonably well, actually, but an awful lot of promises have been made by other countries, other European countries, and they haven't really delivered on them. And that is worrying because the Ukrainians very, very bravely, I mean, the bravery of the nation is quite extraordinary, are fighting against the Russians, and they need this equipment to keep fighting, and we need them to keep going, actually. It's easy for us to say that because, of course, we're not taking the casualties. But there are some real, I mean, having made these statements at the NATO summit, if you look at UK, for example, there are some extraordinary issues to do with funding the military and spending money on defence in this country.
Yes.
When we have a defence secretary who says very clearly one day, look, we really must spend more on defence. And my goodness me, he's right, we really must, because our stockpiles are going down, we haven't got enough troops, we haven't got enough ships, a whole mass of things. And then he immediately recants, so to speak, the next day in the morning, where clearly he's been told by, presumably, number 10, hang on, wind your neck in, don't say this. Well, I cannot understand the reluctance of this government and presumably the Treasury and others not to spend money on defence. The one thing I can assure them is that in Ukraine they're not spending money on DWP and on healthcare and things like that because they're actually fighting. And if there's a risk of a war, you need to ensure your armed forces are up to scratch. And I'm afraid we have not spent enough on them in the past, and they need money spent on them now urgently.
So in Ukraine, there are worries that the promises are not translated into action. And when it comes to the broader NATO front, and let's look at our bit of that front, the British bit. You say you're baffled by what you've heard. What do you make of it? Is this a case of, I don't know, our own Prime Minister, the British government, talking a good game, but just not backing it up?
Well, I have to say I sort of wondered whether it was partly that the Prime Minister wanted to be the one that announced there was going to be money spent on defence, which as I say is really needed, and not to let the Secretary of State for Defence say it.
Well, he pretty much said as much.
Too simplistic.
Well, I mean, Ben Wallace pretty much said as much. He said he had a line in his speech which he took out so the Prime Minister could deliver it himself, but we don't know what it's going to amount to.
Well, and I think that's a very important thing. I mean, I am very worried about resilience. If you think, I mean, let me take a naval example. Earlier this week, if you added it up, we had 17 major war vessels that were actually operational. That's the 2 carriers, a landing platform dock. I think it was 2 of our Type 45s, 8 of the Type 23s, and 4 nuclear submarines. Now, we sunk 4 destroyers and frigates, and 8 were badly damaged in 30 days of fighting in the Falklands. That's more, almost, than we've got altogether. I
Yeah.
mean, the last war, we were fighting a peer enemy, we lost 170 destroyers. And if you look at the army, the Chief of Defence Staff was talking about an armoured division, and he said, we cannot field one with all of the right stockpiles and all of the right equipment and everything so it could fight a peer enemy until the 2030s. He talked about increasing the number of ships we've got, and the number's going up. He said it's not, it's going down. The number won't go up until the 2030s. Well, I'm afraid enemies don't wait until you're all sorted out in the 2030s before they do anything.
Yeah.
And that is extremely worrying.
Yeah, well, it puts a sort of darker backdrop to what we heard from the chief of the general staff, General Sanders, yesterday. When what was needed, he argued, was a step change in the capabilities of this country and all the NATO allies. From what you're saying there, if it is bold talk and it's not backed up by clear commitment and lasting commitment, it's not going to do the job of deterring Putin, is it, from taking that step to the next level of aggression?
No, because he will be doing, his intelligence services will be doing analysis of what's going on in this country instead of in the way of producing equipments. They'll have made estimates at stockpiles. They'll know what we've given to the Ukrainians. They'll be calculating all of these, and they'll be saying to him, "Don't worry about it. They're not ready to go, and they won't do anything." The other real worry is, in a NATO context, if you don't have sufficient conventional forces to just hold the line and let people rethink, you suddenly tip over and go towards nuclear, and that is, nobody rational wants that.
Okay, Lord West, Admiral Lord West, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us in today's briefing room.